Hello there, this is Jay Frost speaking to you in this day and age from Grand Rapids, Michigan, of all places, at the Hampton Inn, so thank you, Hampton. But talking to you, of course, from the Philanthropy Mastermind series brought to you by our friends at DonorSearch. And we won't be talking about DonorSearch today, so if you're interested in learning more about them, and I hope you are, then just take a look over at donorsearch.net, where you can learn all about the company's work in helping you understand more about your donors, but also you can see this incredible calendar and lineup of extraordinary people in fundraising, development, and alumni engagement, among other things, which we're going to be talking about today with our guest. But before I get underway and provide a proper introduction to someone who probably doesn't need one, but definitely deserves one, I want to make sure that I introduce, as if you've never heard of Zoom before, how you can be a part of this conversation, since we can't see or hear you. And the first, of course, is chat. So down at the bottom of the screen, you're going to see something where you can go ahead and click that and let us know that you're here. That would be so kind of you to do right now, to just open up chat and say hello, maybe where you're from. Good morning, Frank. And maybe which organization you're from or what you do there. Use that as a place to have a conversation between and among yourselves, but also it's a courtesy to our guest today so that she will know that you're here. So please do open up chat if you would right now and just let us know that you're present and accounted for. Good to see you there, Julie, in Kalamazoo. I was just there a couple days ago, meeting with another of our guests in the series. So please do continue using the chat throughout. However, I also want to encourage you to use Q&A. That's the place for questions. Why? Because we might see them get lost in the chat. So do keep an eye on the Q&A, and if you have a question or an observation that you want us to be able to shout out during the conversation today, please do use Q&A for that, chat for the rest. And with that, I want to jump into our conversation with our guest today. So to do that, of course, it's best to begin with a proper introduction. And that is with, of course, Christine Fairchild, as you see right there on the screen. Hi, Christine. Thanks so much for being here today. I'm going to ask you about your background in a moment. Christine is, among many things, Hugh Price Fellow of Jesus College and Director of Alumni Relations at Oxford University. And she has been there for a number of years, as you will learn in a moment, but you will also know from her accent, if you don't know her biography, that she has spent quite a substantial time on both sides of the pond, so to speak. She has been serving as Director of Alumni Relations at Oxford since March 2011. But before that, she, of course, was at Harvard University, Harvard Business School specifically, 7 years there, and heading up the External Relations Department at Harvard Business School. But she's been in a number of institutions along the path and knows not only what it's like on both sides of the pond, but also both sides of, and it's not both sides at all, but two different distinct elements of what make all of development, alumni relations, and all of our constituent relations possible. This alumni engagement piece or engagement piece, and development and advancement, all of which have to work symbiotically, or we can't raise money, or more importantly, have the close friendships which guide us and fuel our work. So with that, Christine, again, thank you so much for hanging out today. Really do appreciate your taking the time, especially since it's late in the day there. Where are you pictured? What are we looking at?
Well, it is funny because if you know Oxford, this is called the Bridge of Sighs, which is a little walkway that was modeled after the Bridge of Sighs in Florence that connects Hartford College. And it is probably the most photographed spot at the university, where typically the tourist will stand beneath the Bridge of Sighs and their loved one will take a photo of them in that moment. And so it looks as if I'm sitting in underneath the Bridge of Sighs, and this is my office away from the office. But we have a series of these wonderful backdrop screenshots that we can use. One of them is perched on top of the Radcliffe Camera, which is the iconic building at Oxford that's the student library. Another one is outside of the Museum of the History of Science, which has these wonderful sculptural heads perched on these columns. And at Christmas time, my office has photoshopped little Santa hats for the top of the sculptures, which is just sort of charming. You have to sort of be careful who you're talking to. I don't really want to talk to the vice chancellor when I've got my Santa hat on, but it's just a nice backdrop, because honestly, I work in the most mundane office in the world, and it's such a shame because Oxford is such a beautiful city and such a remarkable university with so many beautiful buildings. But sadly, our administrative building is one of those ghastly poured concrete monstrosities from 1984. So I try to dress it up as much as possible.
Wow, that's my college graduation year, so I can only imagine how mundane I look. Yes. So the buildings
So
at that time were not exciting, but that's one of many buildings, as you're pointing out, in architectural things at Oxford. For those who don't really know anything about Oxford, do you mind giving us a window on that? I mean, we're talking about
yeah.
the oldest English language university in the world, but it's much more than that.
It is pretty amazing. So I don't know. Everyone sort of says it started at different times. It could have been 11 something or 13 something. It depends on who you talk to.
Mhm.
But it is ancient. And in America, we were always just so impressed at ourselves when we were, celebrating the bicentennial.
Right.
Really and truly, everything kind of comes into focus when you're here. It is a remarkable place because of its sort of decentralization, first of all, and the structure of it, or some would say the lack thereof. So there are 39 different colleges here at Oxford.
Hmm.
And when you are a student applying to Oxford, typically you apply to one of the colleges to study a particular thing. So when you're in that, very young, and frankly, I don't think you're ready to know what you want to do with your life. You have to decide what you want to do and who you want to study with and what. So you apply to study at a college. So as an undergraduate, you spend the 3 years, it's a 3-year program, in that college, and that college experience is so important. It is sort of it's the beginning, the middle, and the end for you. It is where you eat, you sleep, you learn, you engage socially. Everything happens in the confines of that college, and so no surprise, your relationship as an alum is first and foremost with that college. Then there are these wonderful divisions, which are these academic divisions, of which there are 4 of them. There's the humanities, the maths, physical life sciences, the humanities, social sciences, sorry, and medical sciences. And those divisions are the academic structure where all of the academic departments slot in. So if you're a graduate student, let's say you're studying medicine here, you might not feel quite so connected to your college, but you'll feel very connected to your department for obvious reasons, because that's really where you're spending an awful lot of time in the lab. And so as a result, your affinity might be first with your department instead of your college. And you will also have had an undergraduate experience someplace else. So that will have been sort of formed in your heart. And then there's the central offices that I'm part of. I'm part of a central portfolio that's made up of public affairs, the development office, and international engagement. And alumni relations is one of the legs of the stool there. And we are part of that central portfolio that looks after the sort of central relationship that the university has with the world through public affairs. The development office, you'll find this sort of interesting, does not primarily raise money from alumni. The development office raises money primarily from non-alumni because of the negotiation it had to go through with the colleges. The colleges have said historically that the relationship that they have with their alumni should be their relationship. And so the expectation is that alumni will support their college first and foremost. And if the university has an interest in an alum, let's say there is a very wealthy alum that is at Hartford College behind me, the university would have to go to Hartford and say, Hartford, we really would like to be able to approach your alum, Josephine Smith, for a gift to support X. Would you be happy with that? And Hartford can say no, I'm terribly sorry, but we actually have other plans for Josephine. So no, you cannot approach Josephine.
Hmm.
It is, and it goes the other way too, where colleges, if they see a particularly wealthy person out there who is not affiliated with their college, they have to come to the central development office to ask if they'd be willing to support, if they'd be willing to allow this college to go and have a chat with this person. So it's just a very interesting dynamic. It's sort of similar to what I remember, and Tim Wilson, who's on this call as well, will remember this from Harvard Business School days. There was, when we were out there in our business school environment, there was a real sort of a negotiation between the center of Harvard, the central development function at Harvard, around donors and how we thought about those donors, how we created a donor strategy for them, how we stewarded them, all of that. What's been interesting at Oxford is that alumni are starting to wake up in the same way that I think they did at Harvard as well, where they've started to say to us, don't you, university or college, make decisions on my behalf. Please let me be the one who makes that decision. And it's such a refreshing approach. Actually, it really is. It's the donor should be in control of their relationship. Of course, there should be wonderful opportunities for the entities to shape that relationship where possible. Of course, they should. But at the end of the day, it's really I think it's quite disturbing to the donor to think that we're sitting in back rooms deciding who they can and can't talk to. So it's been an interesting time here, because suddenly I went from being in the business school in that lovely independent entity where we had very, very wealthy alumni who were very willing to support the business school, and the evil empire was the center of Harvard. Suddenly I'm empress of the evil empire. So it's sort of an interesting change in dynamic. I
So
also have to
many.
say another thing too, Jay, that was just it sort of brought forth, it kind of clarified for me people's perception of, or misperceptions of Oxford. Just yesterday, I was in the street on my way to a meeting, and a woman stopped me holding her phone, staring kind of puzzled at her phone. And she said, in an accent I couldn't tell, something about, excuse me, where is the University of Oxford? Where is it? And it is everywhere. That's the wonderful thing. We don't have a campus in the way some of you do in your institutions, where you've got that lovely, sort of green center campus quad thing that sort of unites everything with the administrative offices around it and all that. We are strewn throughout the city, so it's everywhere.
And is that because of the growth organically over 500 years, or is that or more?
Well, it's because the colleges are 39 different entities, and each of them have a very different ethos and a different look and a feel and a different architectural style in many cases. So if you just take the colleges alone, those are 39, and they are so surprisingly big. When I got here, I took me a while to get into a college, to be frank with you, because they are fairly sort of opaque. But once you get in, once you come through that beautiful gate or wooden door or whatever it is that dates back to 1422, you're in these series of quads and buildings that sort of telescope out. And so the footprint of each of these colleges is really quite enormous. Which you're not quite aware of. It's sort of like Alice, or the Secret Garden kind of thing. And it's just magical. It really is. And so then you add on top of the colleges, you add on all of those departments and all of the sort of added academic structures around. It's pretty remarkable. If any of you have not been to Oxford, I really do urge you to come. It's one of the most beautiful cities. And go to Cambridge as well. Don't leave that out either.
Right. They do actually. It's funny when you look at even the websites of the two universities, and then you see the tourist kind of information about it. They do talk about the green of Cambridge. So as if it's something they're proud of. I said, I don't know if they have more grass or
Well, they do. They have something called the backs, which is these incredibly long, sort of rolling, grassy pieces of land that back on the backs of the colleges that back onto the River Cam. And so they're right to say we're the city of dreaming spires, and Cambridge is the I don't know what their tagline is, but it is green and beautiful. I mean, really, really beautiful. Yeah.
There's so much to talk about in what you just described about that relationship between the colleges, the graduate schools, and that experience. If you're in a lab, it's different from spending those years with the dons at the college, or the central development operation that you described, and its similarities and differences in comparison to a place like Harvard. One of the things that really stands out, of course, is that idea that the donor should be in control of the relationship. Often when I hear about this kind of evolution, sometimes it's an echo of the past. I'm curious if you have a sense about whether or not there was a time when that was true already, and then we moved away from it, and now it's coming back, or if this is truly a new thing where donors are asserting themselves.
I think that's a really great question, Jay, and I don't know the answer, to be honest with you. There's a lot that's different now about the way people engage with their institutions, especially here in the UK. And I think it's because there is so much more awareness of on the part of the alum. There's much more awareness that giving to their institution is an important thing to do. It wasn't for the longest time. Not to say that there weren't benefactions over the years, of course there were. But I think there is so much more attention paid now to how institutions are funded and the role that alumni play in that, in ensuring the success, the financial success of the institution going forward. I don't think we're as good as America is at explaining ourselves financially. We are not good at sharing our balance sheets and the really sort of robust annual reports. And again, Tim will remember at Harvard Business School, and granted it was a business school, the pleasure we would take in sharing that. It was a really important element of our communication. But here it's been fairly, I'll use the word opaque again. The universities didn't make terribly good they didn't make a terribly good case for why alumni should give. And it certainly wasn't an obligation. In America, there's this wonderful, I swear that we've been born with little microchips embedded in our necks that suddenly, we go to university or we apply to university and we are applying to a university understanding that we're going to join an alumni community. That's absolutely part of our consciousness, whereas it's not so much here, or it hasn't been so much here. And this has been it's been an interesting process to get alumni to realize the role they play in this institution. They didn't have to pay for their education forever until about 10 years ago when fees were first introduced. So there simply wasn't the same skin in the game when it came to the relationship between an alum and its institution. So that said, I think a lot is changing. I think we are creating donors and prospects who are much more au fait with wanting to, with the way institutions are run, and also much more willing to set out their own expectations for that relationship. And certainly younger alumni are when it comes to telling us what they want. We are dealing much more with a sort of a customer-based experience now, where students who are paying and going into debt as a result of being at university, that's a new phenomenon here. They fought that tooth and nail, but now they are expecting more from us, certainly on the alumni relations side, to ensure that relationship is strong and that they get something beneficial. It's relevant, whatever they get. They're asking for it. So yeah, it's an interesting time.
Can you talk a bit more about that, about definitionally, I guess, what it looks like to be part of the alumni at a place like Harvard Business School, what the implicit social contract is, what people think they're going to get out of it, and then what it is currently and what you imagine it's going to be in the future for Oxford?
So Harvard Business School is one of those places where it is, it's sort of right at the top of the leaderboard. It is, when you apply to HBS, it is, and you get in, it is a badge of honor, and you are just, you're coming into an association with the institution, but also with your classmates that will, and with the wider community of alumni, that will serve you the rest of your life. You are absolute, that is part of the deal. And even the way HBS is structured at the class structure, the classes are divided up into sections. So there's the 800-person class, but then there are these individual 100-person sections that create these little microcosms of relationships. And you are waving you're waving a banner. It's, HBS on your resume is a hugely helpful thing to have. And granted, there were plenty of people, alumni I talked to, who wouldn't admit to going to HBS right away, because there is also the flip side of people looking at Harvard Business School graduates and thinking that they're arrogant and really, not willing to sort of work in teams. They're very individualistic and arrogant. So there were a couple of plenty of people who were like, I went to school, I went to a small business school in New England, kind of thing.
Right.
And some of that you see here at Oxford as well, and it's because Oxford is sort of tarred by the brush of the press, who say we are an elitist institution. Cambridge the same way, that we are only accepting and training people like Boris Johnson and all the former prime ministers and people, very posh people from very wealthy backgrounds. So we at Oxford have had to work really, really hard at moving that needle away from that perception and moving more toward and increasing the percentage of students from disadvantaged backgrounds. It's been a big effort, and it's been really quite successful, which is a testament to the hard work of the admissions office and alumni who are out there trying to convince people from places like up in the Northeast that Oxford is a place for them. But it is an interesting. I don't think people, as they apply to Oxford, think about the alumni community at all. I really don't. I think they are thinking about, I want that education, I want that experience. The tutorial experience, which is the way Oxford teaches, is a very unique one, and it is our USP in a big way, because it's a very one-on-one or two-on-one experience. So when you are studying, you are sitting with your tutor and you're meeting with that tutor every week. They are setting your reading list. They're telling you what lectures to go to. They're asking you to write papers, and you come in every week needing to defend your ideas. And people say it is the extraordinary way in which they've learned to think, the way they've learned to then be able to defend themselves in other settings. But I don't think we have a very cohesive alumni community. I really don't. And that's not because we've not been trying.
I do want to ask you about that, because I have this distorted image in my mind probably from the Crown series of people going to Eton.
Oh yeah.
And maybe that does compare in some ways to going to Concord or Phillips Exeter, or even in the arts, Interlochen, or we can name some schools, but it being particularly profound there, this idea that if you go there, this is where so many prime ministers have come from. Is that, how is it that Oxford and Cambridge and some of these other universities that we could talk about don't seem to have that in the same way that these schools do?
Oh, well, we do, sadly, because all of those prime ministers who went to Eton, they went to Oxford. Right. They went on to Oxford. But
the idea that they all went to Eton, I mean.
Yeah. Well, it is a funny thing. It's hard to say. This country is very class-based. It just is. It is, no matter where you are, what you're doing, it creeps in. And it's a very interesting phenomenon, so different than what I grew up with in America. So that's definitely taken some getting used to. I think what's interesting is that now that we are accepting more students from these different districts and disadvantaged backgrounds and all that stuff, they are coming out of this experience of 3 years here doing an undergraduate degree or a graduate degree with the Oxford brand. And people will be looking at them and thinking or making up in their mind that, oh, you went to Oxford, you must be very grand. And they will have to fight that fight. They themselves will have to say, well, actually, I'm a first generation. No one in my family has been to university before. I'm first generation, and I'm from, Newcastle or Liverpool or whatever, deepest, darkest South London, and it is interesting. It's going to somehow, I think, help level the playing field a bit, that we will have to stop thinking of us. Yes, we are elite in that we accept people who are just the brightest. We just accept nothing but the brightest, but we are not elitist. We are not elitist, and really trying to kind of change that dialogue is a big job for going forward. And you know, the other thing too is around staff. So if I look across the staff, the faces of the staff here and the academics, it's not a terribly diverse looking staff and academic pool.
Mhm.
We are working very hard at getting the students to come, but we've got a long ways to go to create a sense of, you know, a truly diverse universe of people who work here.
And I wonder where the interest or pressures might be coming from for that. In the United States, you know, a lot of people have talked about diversity for a long time, but there's been particular focus on making good on those discussions in the last few years. Has it been similar within the UK, or
Yes.
are there other? And is the pressure coming from government or from society in general, from the media?
I
Where is
think
that?
it's all of that probably and more. I do think there's pressure from society, and rightly so, absolutely. I think we are trying to be representative of what this country really is, and there is
Hmm.
plenty of diversity across this country. So I think we are trying to mirror that as much as possible.
Now, in terms of the office itself and building that sense that you know you wear the brand, like we talk about for the Big Ten or something like that, people literally wearing the sweatshirts and
Yep.
watching the football games, or being a part of the alumni club at Yale. You know, so you know
Yep.
when you go to different cities, you can go there and have a meal or hang out with alumni, even that you may not know yet. Are you building something similar there? And what kinds of, it's the wrong word, but it's a commercial word, but benefits are you offering in order to instill this sense that, no, you really are one. It doesn't matter if you came from, you know, somewhere in Scotland or from Brixton, or, you know, you just graduated from Eton, that we're all one family here. What are you
Yep.
doing in terms of the benefit structure to instill that?
So the benefit structure is, we decided to, or at least when I got here, we were throwing everything at people, at everyone. We were, you know, everything we could think of. We were, you know, discounts at local hotels with your alumni card, and as well as, you know, access to JSTOR and the online journals that are available. Um, Invitations back to attend events here, you know, membership in local alumni groups. For instance, we've got 180 alumni groups around the world. So a lot of what we do on that side of things in terms of providing benefits are the typical things you would expect. You know, access to the career service office, for instance, and being able to meet with a career advisor, no matter where you are in your life, you know, how old you are or how far you've been out, graduated. That still is available. And interestingly, Cambridge does not do that. It is interesting, this notion of kind of um, of benefits that are valued is a fairly new approach here. I think
Mhm.
because we used to be in the business of throwing everything at everybody, we didn't really think hard about curating those benefits so that they made sense for you at the right time in your life, based on where you were in the world. So we just sort of did the cookie cutter approach, but we are changing that. And I think everybody who's worth their salt is probably doing the same thing, thinking hard about the segmentation of their alumni, thinking hard about what is it that resonates with people at a particular time in their life that will make a difference, that will leave an impression, that will give them a sense of that the university cares about them and is there for them. You know, this idea that the university is sort of home base for you, that it's a place to come no matter where you are, when you
Right.
are thinking about it, is something that is, again, it's a very new phenomenon. Oxford alumni would go through the program, finish their 3 years or finish their degree, their graduate degree, and off they would go. And they wouldn't really hear a thing from the university. Um,
So they wouldn't hear, but were they coming back anyway? You know how sometimes if you lived somewhere when you were young and you know your family moved, but sometimes you drive by the old house 20,
yeah,
30 years later,
yeah.
you go there anyway, even though nobody at the house is inviting you in for lunch. So was that happening? Were people going back to the campus anyway, or
Well,
not
it's
the
a
Oxford?
yeah, it's a great analogy, that of going back to your childhood home. Uh, yes, they may have, but we never clocked it. and we never really, we certainly don't have a place or a way to welcome them. So unlike other campuses where there is a place that's sort of where the central alumni office, is sitting right there. I went to Concord Academy for my independent school, and it's just so obvious where you go, where you can, sort of feel welcomed. It's not obvious here. We don't have an alumni center or anything. I'm very jealous. If anybody's been out to Stanford, I just encourage you to stop by the Alumni Center at Stanford. It is Howard Wolf is the head of alumni relations at Stanford, and he's brilliant, and his team is brilliant. And they've got the most gorgeous building with, everything from computers set up with and massage chairs and all sorts of crazy things. But anyway, the university simply didn't do a terribly good job of creating that kind of that pull, so that you'd come back and you'd feel welcome. Now, 15 years ago, somebody prior to me started up an alumni weekend where we invite alumni back for a series of, sort of 60 or 70 events over the course of the weekend. And that's been going, as I said, for 15 years, and has been a really successful thing. We've maxed out at, I think the largest number we've ever had in person show up has been about 1,200, something like that. So that's fine for Oxford, but if you think about some other, homecomings and things that other universities do, they get far more than that, I think. So again, it is a fairly new phenomenon to think about your university as a place to go to find answers or to find solutions. And we want to change that. That's something we want to change.
So it's well, that's obviously the kind of work that you're doing there to build that. I know sometimes when you want to reinforce that, you need the infrastructure to do it. That's staff, that's resources, that's making sure that other people within the university structure, president, others, faculty members, that they have time so they can meet with people. But it's also the infrastructure of volunteers. So just kind of tearing that apart a little bit and starting with the volunteers. Do you have something that looks like a class agent structure, or are you building one, or how does that work? How do you engage with somebody who is a catalyst for activity within a class?
Yeah, so that would fall to the colleges to do, again, because they own that experience, if you will, and that college affinity and being part of a cohort of people who were there at the same time is one that is really sort of uniquely owned by the colleges, somewhat with the departments as well, but mostly with the colleges. Interestingly, in America, you'll say, I graduated in 1984. Here, you don't talk about that. You talk about when you matriculated. You talk about when you started.
Oh,
which I still don't understand to this day why that is, but that's the date that you're connecting with other people around.
Is that sort of coming of age or something? What do you think? As you think about it now, what?
I think, part of what it is the matriculation ceremony here, which is just that. It is a ceremony where the students dress in something called subfusk, which is a uniform that they wear when they matriculate, which is to enter the university. They also wear subfusk when they do their exams. And this is a uniform. It's a uniform. You have to wear a white shirt, a black tie, a black gown. Women wear either black skirts or black trousers. Men wear black trousers, black shoes. It's very regimented. And when it comes to taking your exams, the thing that might tell people you're taking your exam is that you wear a carnation you pin a carnation to your black robe. It's either a white carnation, a pink carnation, or a red carnation. And don't ask me which one. One of them you do in your first year, one of them in your second year, one in your third year. But anyway, that maybe because you are actually matriculating with your cohort. Whereas graduation, and this is such a sort of head scratcher to me, at Oxford, graduation, you can graduate whenever you want. In other words, there are graduation ceremonies littered throughout the year, and you can decide which one you want to come to. And you can wait 3 or 4 years before you come back for a graduation ceremony. So it doesn't mean that you've not gotten your certificate and you're all finished, but that closure, that sort of ceremonial closure, doesn't necessarily happen with the people that you started with. So I
Wow.
think the reason that they pick matriculation year as the one to sort of talk about is because you all started together in that ceremony in the Sheldonian Theater, and it's all conducted in Latin, and it's just amazing.
That's
So
so
that might be why.
interesting on so many levels, because it's almost, I wonder if the analog for some of this, because Oxford is so old, these colleges have been around so long, if some of it might even have roots in things that are analogous again to religious traditions, where entry is more like baptism. And then if you take your exams, it's more like confirmation. But when you think about it, once you become a member of, in the Christian tradition, if you go through that in Protestantism, once you do those things, there's no leaving ceremony, because
No,
the idea
exactly,
is once you enter
you're in.
Christianity, you're in for life.
Yeah.
So they don't, you don't have a graduation from Christianity. I wonder if
Wow.
maybe that's part of what's happening here.
Well, it could be. It's a very interesting. Somebody needs to write a thesis on this. I think
Well,
maybe this will be my next life. Yeah.
So you don't have the
But it
class.
means that as a result, one of the interesting phenomena associated with that is that for my office, who's very keen to connect with students as they're moving from the student experience into a graduate experience, into an alumni experience, I want to be sure that we capture them as quickly as we can and make the case for why they should stay in touch, why they should, excuse me, give us consent to contact them. One of the things that those of you who have colleagues who work in the outside of the US may know about this whole GDPR, which is this data protection legislation that's come through. I don't know how many years ago it was now, maybe 6 or 7, which means that we at the university have to secure people's consent before we can be in touch with them. It is not the American system, which is an opt-out system. I'd like to opt out of receiving anything from you. Thank you very much, University of whatever. Here you have to opt in, which is just, honestly, Jay, it's a terrible thing for alumni relations. And it all started because there was this little old lady who, bless her, was living a very, very sort of small life and, trying to make things work. And she was a serial contributor to charities, to small charities, especially animal charities, I think. And she was feeling completely bombarded by the unsolicited mail that she was receiving, mostly mail, but she was also, maybe she also had email too. Anyway, and she committed suicide. And it really, it began the process where the government said, this has to stop. We've got to regulate this space. And so we are going to ask you to take this approach, approach of collecting consent. Now, there is a little loophole that I'm trying to convince the hires up to accept, which is called legitimate interest. I don't think you can apply to a university and study here for X number of years and not expect to hear from them. I just don't think that's a reasonable expectation. And now, granted, I would perfectly respect your desire to opt out. So that that very much features on all of our emails. But I really, we need to be able to be in touch with, especially with people who are just graduating, because we know that if we lose them in that first year, it's very hard to get them back. Very tough.
Right. Yeah. Again, using that old home analogy, I guess, even if they do visit Oxford, the city of Oxford, and then they aren't necessarily, I mean, I don't know how you would find them in order to say, would you opt in?
That's it. Yeah.
Very difficult.
And
So,
at the end of the day, too, there's another reason why we want to keep track of those graduating students. There's a survey that's called the Graduate Outcomes Survey that all universities have to report on, and that happens 3 years after you've graduated, I think is the time frame. So we need to keep in touch with them, because the Career Service needs to be able to send out this Graduate Outcomes Survey and report on where our students have landed, what kind of a job do they have, where are they? Because that is basically feeding back into the university's rankings, if you will. If we're able to report that 85% of our graduates in the first 3 years have found employment, that reflects very well on the university. So it's a lot of reporting that needs to go into some of this, the reasons we do this.
Is that a private? Is that like the U.S. News rankings that?
Yeah,
that
it's actually not, it's not even a ranking. I think it is something that the government requests to see
Okay,
because
so you
the
can't
government
fulfill.
used, yeah,
Yes.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Wow, that's really fascinating. I want to make sure we do touch on another big piece of this, which will be important to listeners now and later, which is this distinction, if there should be one at all, between alumni engagement, which we've been talking largely about, and other development activities.
Mhm,
So, how are you dividing those things, if at all, right
mhm.
now, and how does that compare and contrast to maybe the way that you know from the U.S. approach to that in terms of who does what and whether or not alumni engagement is seen by those in development, if in fact those are two separate silos, they're not everywhere, how alumni engagement is viewed in terms of revenue production.
Sure. Well, alumni engagement was a poor stepchild for forever, and it's only just now beginning to kind of come into the light. I think it was seen as sort of the necessary evil, and it was really given such short shrift. It was sort of thought to be, putting out white tablecloths and popping the prosecco bottles, and that was it. That was what we did in alumni. That was
Right.
the perception that alumni relations existed to do that. And so I've really worked hard to change that perception to be one much more where it's tied to the goals of the institution, where alumni are seen to be delivering on those goals, where we start to perceive our alumni as, our partners, as opposed to, a necessary evil. They are the operations of alumni relations and development are very separate here at Oxford, which I've loved. It's been wonderful. I've been really happy to have that autonomy to be able to run my own alumni relations shop, not tied to the development office. And I said earlier, as you'll remember, the central development office raises money primarily from non-alumni. So I kept making the point that why would I report into the development office when its constituency isn't my constituency?
Right.
I am way more aligned with the colleges and I complement the work that they do. I amplify the work that they do. We make the silly analogy of like a layer cake, where there is a layer that is the college experience that people have and the college loyalty that they feel. There is another layer that is the departmental loyalty that they feel. There's perhaps another layer that is their sporting club that they were really aligned with. Another layer might be the museums or the libraries that they visited or the gardens. And we're the icing on that cake because we are basically bringing the cake together as a sum of its parts, really. And so it's important that we stand separately, that we actually do maintain our autonomy for now. That said, we are very closely linked in with there's a new campaign that's burbling in the back burner right now, a new capital campaign. We just finished a capital campaign a few years ago called the Oxford Thinking Campaign, which always made me scratch my head because it just felt so passive. It's sort of like, well, isn't Oxford doing? It shouldn't be thinking, it should be doing. But anyway, it was a very successful campaign. In the UK, we raised 3.5 billion pounds, which was a first for any university. So we're about to launch another one. We're in super quiet phase right now. And one of the things I've asked is to be included in that campaign so that we set for ourselves a goal alongside the philanthropic goals of, X billion pounds for this initiative and for that initiative, that we also set ourselves a goal for alumni engagement. And that's going to be predicated on the 4 pillars that CASE has identified as defining of engagement. So that is philanthropic support, that is volunteerism, it is participation in events, and participation through communications. So it's basically, are you opening and reading things and all that? And so we'll take that framework, that engagement framework, and set ourselves some goals around that will tell a story that I think could be a really powerful story of how engaged our alumni really are. Got a lot of work to do to get them that way, to get them engaged. But I think it's exciting. It'll be the first time that we'll be sort of sitting at the table with the campaign folks as we think that strategy through. And that was one of the things I loved at HBS. It was alumni relations, HBS and Harvard and Yale and Dartmouth and Princeton, and probably all of you who are here on the call from other universities. You really do value your alumni, and I'll bet you have a better seat at the table than we have had here, because I just think it's a nascent, it's still in its growing phase, this appreciation for alumni and what they can do for the institution.
But it does sound like you have and are forming close complementary relationships with the individual colleges,
Very
which
much so.
might not be necessary at most U.S. institutions, but also are critical to the success of the relationships that graduates of Oxford have with their college and with the university as a whole, and with one another. But it also sounds like then you have addressed any kind of potential spirit of competition that people have sometimes between the colleges, as well as between alumni engagement in the college. So did you have pressures before where people said, we don't really need to work with you, we've got it all under control, or we don't want somebody messing in our business?
Absolutely. In fact, and not that long ago either. It's an interesting holdover or hangover or something from sort of the old way of thinking about things. There are plenty of, still, sadly, there are a group of colleges that are basically have sort of, crossed their arms and said, no, thanks. We really don't need to be broadcasting your events. We don't need you to broadcast our events. We're fine. And what's nice is that their alumni are starting to wake up and say, wait a minute, I would, if I'm a Magdalen College alum, for instance, this happened actually, where a member of my alumni board, who's a Magdalen College alum, said to me, Christina, I never heard about alumni events that you ran. Magdalen never would promote those at all. Why was that, Christine? And I had to say, it's because your college development and alumni relations officer just really didn't want to, didn't feel that they should or needed to.
Oh,
So
wow.
happily, again, alumni are starting to stand up and say, wait a minute, we need to change this maybe from the inside out.
And the fact that they opted in, I guess, for communications with their college doesn't mean they opted in for communications from you.
No, sadly, no.
Oh,
So I
wow,
mean,
that's
really,
another wrinkle.
it's a bit of a messy ball of wax, I'd say.
Wow.
Yeah.
We did have some questions from people who are here. I'm so sorry I haven't been involving you yet so far, but I want to bring them to you now, Christine,
Great.
see if you have thoughts on these. And if anyone else has a question, please, I want to encourage you to go ahead and post it to the questions tab. I may not have seen it if you put one in chat. So the first one that had come in earlier was from Frank, who had asked, if AI, and I don't know if you've used artificial intelligence at Oxford generally or in your office specifically, but will AI enable you to better target specific benefits to specific alumni? This kind of thing you're talking about.
It's such an interesting question, Frank, because I just saw a post. Gosh, I wonder if it was yours. Frank, do you work in AI by any chance? I saw something on LinkedIn, an individual who is very much in the AI space and who sees the opportunity for AI to support and amplify the alumni experience. And that is very new to me. The most I can say about AI is that we have an alumni group that is an AI alumni group, a group for alumni working in AI. And we had a networking reception for them during our Meeting Minds weekend. And we had about 300 people show up and get very excited about connecting with other people in AI. So certainly as an industry and as an interest, it is a burgeoning one. I have yet to harness it for our shop here. This is the other thing I will admit, is that technology and the embracing of technology here is very slow. I mean, it's sort of embarrassing. In fact, I always feel as if I have to apologize to my alumni for their online experience when they go to do the simplest thing, like request an alumni card or something. We don't have an app. We don't have any of those lovely sort of seamless, elegant solutions to engaging with people yet. And we are a far way away from having one, because we are still, operating, you might say, in the 21st century, but we're a 14th century university I mean, frankly, COVID was the best thing that could have happened to us from the standpoint of engagement, because we would not have been able to embrace digital content delivery as quickly as we did. We would have been too frightened of it.
Wow.
So,
So on the most basic level of that is this. So have you seen a lot more
Oh,
Have
Lord,
you had a
yes.
lot more engagement with alumni?
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely. And then we saw it fall right off, and other people may feel the same too, where we had this enormous uptick of interest when we did programs. We did introduce programs very quickly after lockdown began in March of whatever that was, 2020.
Mm,
Um, we launched our first digital event very soon thereafter, and we had an enormous amount of interest in that and in subsequent ones. And now we're finding huge drop off. We're finding people are still registering for these digital events. We had one the other night. We had 400 people register for a wonderful careers event around alternative careers, and we had 100 people show up.
okay,
So that was a significant attrition.
right.
And that's, I think there is a lot of Zoom fatigue out there, frankly.
There is, although people are also consuming content different ways. We even see in this series that we'll have a certain number register, fewer attend, but then we're seeing more people viewing on YouTube later. So I guess that's hard to measure too, isn't it?
Well, it is. And we do have a content library where we've taken all of our digital content and the stuff that we've streamed from live content. We've put it into this digital library, and we are going to do an analysis of what does that look like. I think one of the things we're going to have to think much harder at doing is creating different formats. I do think, Jay, this hour-long format,
Mhm.
it is not working for a younger audience who's looking for literally a 20-minute podcast where they're in between subway stations or they're, on the bus or something. We have to think about how to create, it's sort of the TED Talk model, basically, to make this more accessible for different people who don't want this long, drawn out.
Well, that's it. That's our show today.
I
No,
know.
we'll give everybody the 20-minute version afterwards. Oh, that's interesting. So, Scott, you put it in the chat, but I managed to see it. Define younger. This
Yeah.
is always a treacherous question. So,
Right. Well, I will define younger as we're thinking about younger as in sort of below the age of 35 but that's probably even a little high. I think you can get some micro youngers in there, micro groups in there. One of our heads of house here, the woman Jane Shaw, who is the principal at Harris Manchester College, just wrote a book called Why Gen Z Matters. And it's a terrific book to help, and it's helped us a lot, understand the motivations and the proclivities of this particular generation and what we need to do to respond to them. There's an awful lot that we need to do differently. And it's starting with content, certainly.
right. We another couple of questions, if we can, before the hour leaves us. And for those who left after 20 minutes, well, hopefully you'll see this in segments later. So just a comment from Nikki, who had said, thank you, great insights, and also asked if you could share an example of a specific initiative you found to be successful to engage new alumni.
Right.
Going on the theme of younger, I guess. Everybody would define a new alumnus as...
Well, a new one is one who is fresh out.
Right.
I think really the best way we can have, or the most success we've had with them, is really around the career side of things. It's been really certainly in the sort of post-COVID world, it's been such an uncertain environment to graduate into. And gone are the days where you could feel pretty confident that you could find yourself in a role pretty quickly. The other thing that is, I think, really important to remember is that this generation, this graduating generation, is not necessarily interested in consultancy and banking, but they are actually looking for alternatives and things where they can actually make a difference. This idea of sort of whether it's something in the social enterprise space or something. So really, that was one of the focuses of our session last week, was around people who've made the alternative career decision to go into something that was not mainstream at all, that was a bit riskier, that required a bit more of a deep breath and sort of thinking, living with the uncertainty of what that, whether it was a startup or whether it was a really small teeny weeny shop or something. So I think the way we resonate with the newer, younger alumni is to talk to them about the issues that they're facing at the moment and be sure that we're giving them practical solutions for that. So some of it might be if they're moving to a new city, it's helping them acclimate in that new city by introducing them to the local group that is based in that city to give them some tips and things. They're not really interested in the discounts that we offer at the Randolph Hotel. Why would they be? They're not staying in hotels. But the things like the online journals, that's been another thing that's really appealed to younger folks. We find a lot of our young alumni are actually taking a year and then going right back into another degree. So these academic journals are definitely of interest.
We did have a question from Morgan too. It's a bit of a niche question, but I've heard this kind of question for a long time, and it's so important. So I'm really glad you asked it, Morgan. If you have any advice, Christine, for someone working in a school that only goes through 8th grade, this comes up all the time, and you've lived through the independent school experience, and so have I, both professionally and personally. So what do you do? And I would broaden it. So maybe it's K through 6, maybe it's K through 8, maybe it's independent schools. What's the differences? What's the similarity? What do you do?
What do I do, as in what kind of
How do you
programming
engage alumni at that level, especially when their allegiances, as she says here, the allegiances are high to their maybe high schools or universities?
So I think that is such a really interesting question. I guess I would assume that if you were in a school up until the 8th grade, you would have had, in the same way that I feel about Concord Academy, I just feel as if some of my most special friendships were forged there. Some of my special memories were there, certainly. But I still have a really deep sense of my nursery school. This sounds so stupid, but I really honestly could imagine that an affinity with my nursery school or my junior school could still matter to me. I think what's tough is, I guess you really need to keep track of the relationships that were there then. So it's the teachers and it's your fellow classmates. One of the things that's been so great about Facebook is that, so I have, within my Facebook friends, I've got friends that I went to college with. I've got friends that I went to elementary school with, and I moved after I grew up in Stonington, Connecticut, and then I moved to Concord Academy for boarding school. But those friends are still part of my Facebook group. And there were certainly, times where I would get together with them. And so I think it really comes down to, you have to somehow have captured the personal relationships with those people. And if what you're trying to do is to create engagement in order to, expand the fundraising pool, I'm guessing that is one of the motivations. I think you need to really, really talk about the powerful impact that school has today. The little minds that it is shaping, and the little people that it is creating and shaping and taking forth into their next chapter. I think you need to prove the worth of the school, why the school should be in a chamber of your heart. It is. That does take some work.
Yeah, those reminders and those pictures, I'm sure, do tell part of the story. I share them too, and I've seen them just in the last couple of months. With a picture of all of us in 6th grade.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Yep. Oh my goodness me.
I know we're at the hour, and there's so much more we could have discussed, and I'm so grateful that you shared all this with us today. And hopefully, at some point, we can bring you back and let you share again. But thank you again for giving us a glimpse.
Been so great. I did worry a little bit as we started. I thought, gosh, are we going to be able to fill an hour, James? I don't know. Anyway, but it really is such fun. It's fun to talk about this sort of stuff. And if honestly, I'll put my
I was just going to ask if people want to reach out to you. Is that okay? And how should they do that?
Yeah, I'm going to probably put my I'm going to just put my Oxford email address here.
In the chat.
I would be very, very in the chat. Yeah.
Would you be willing to share that verbally as well for those who are watching?
Absolutely. Yep. So just it's Christine.Fairchild. I might not have done that very well. Christine.Fairchild at alumni.ox.ac.uk. So ox-ac-uck, we like to say. Anyway, so please do. And I'm sorry, the chat, I think I did a caret instead of a dot between Christine and Fairchild, but it's Christine.Fairchild at alumni. I think I'm also on the alumni website. So please feel free to get in touch. I'd be very happy to talk to anybody about anything because it's fun and this is great. And thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you so much, Christine. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm sure you learned from it. I did, and hopefully we can revisit this subject again soon. Often we talk about one vertical within development or fundraising or advancement, and that's such a shame because all these things are so complementary as you have been sharing all throughout this presentation. And also a lot more conversations with people who are working in these environments around the world, because once again, we have so much to learn from one another. And I do want to encourage you all to join us next week on a very different subject, but one that's very timely. And that's that Woodrow Rosenbaum, who is the Chief Data Officer at Giving Tuesday, will be here to talk with us about Giving Tuesday and beyond. Lots of data, but lots of insights for those preparing for that special day during the year. That's going to be next Tuesday, of course, Tuesday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So I hope you'll join us for that. And for the rest of our calendar, you can opt in by just going and looking at the DonorSearch site and then get on the list with the other thousands of people who are hearing about these sessions. Or you can see all the past content under the resources tab at DonorSearch.net. And while you're there, if you would, take a look at what they have to offer, because if you care about your donors, your alumni, your friends, your broader constituency, DonorSearch makes it their mission to be able to tell you more about them in ways that are meaningful to you and to them, so you can build on those relationships, just like we've been talking about today. So with that, thank you again to our guest, Christine Fairchild. Thanks to all of you, and take care, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Lovely. Thank you all. Bye-bye.